Yeah, my name is Jesse Barish. I live here in Venice, California. I've been here for quite a while. I got here in the mid 60s, 1965 was my first time that I lived here, and I lived over on Brooks Avenue, and it's pretty amazing time to be living in Venice. Well, it was nothing like it is today. There were about six or seven leftover beatniks that were from the Venice West cafe days. There were about 11 hippies and like a bunch of old Jewish retired people that were living in hotels and apartments in Venice. And there was a tram that ran from Navy Street to Windward for a nickel. You could catch a ride from one end of Venice to the other, and it was very mellow. It was a beautiful scene. I really had a great time, and rents were cheap. I had an apartment on Brooks Avenue for like $65 a month, and it was a great time to be a young guy. There were always Venice has always been a kind of an artsy community. I think it's always attracted the bohemian subculture, so to speak. And I think it's trying to become more yuppified as we speak. Abbott Kinney's becoming very upscale, and Hollywood is discovering Venice, and film companies are moving in, and Google's here. But I think the underlying feeling of Venice will always be an alternative place for people, artists, and creative people to live, unless they price us all out of here. Well, I grew up in Brooklyn on the East Coast, and I lived in Brooklyn till I was about 8 or 9. Then we moved upstate New York to a town called Liberty, where I spent about 6 years. And at about 15, I moved to Miami Beach, where I went to high school. Don't ask me how that trajectory and that itinerary happened, but it did. And then when I got out of high school in 1963, I was kind of the California always had this appeal, the Beach Boys and Pendleton shirts and surfers and Hollywood and Elvis and San Francisco and North Beach. And I was kind of a jazz guy in high school. I kind of didn't really fit in even then. So the coast had a sort of mythical appeal, it always, Jack Kerouac and the Beats. And so when I got out of high school, I just came to California, and that was 1963. And my first place in the LA was in the Valley. I lived in the Valley for a while, tried going to college and working, and I was an abysmal failure at both those things. And then Venice was always the coolest place. Back then it was, just a phenomenal vibe, and much more so then, and because it was right at the kind of the phasing out of the beat generation into the hippie time. So there was that whole cross pollination of both those experiences, and Venice was just always a magnetic vortex for the kind of lifestyle that I was interested in living, which was, an alternative lifestyle. I wasn't interested in being a normal guy, and working and retiring and playing golf and, checking my cholesterol regularly. Well, like I said, when I started out in the mid '60s, it was very quiet. There wasn't much going on there. There were no skaters. There were no people selling anything. There was nothing like it is now. It was, like I said, there was a tram going from Navy Street to Windward for a nickel. You could ride. It was like two cars, an electric tram. It was really cool, and over the years, I think it really started, exploding in the early '80s when the roller skating thing started, and then all of a sudden, the people started selling things, musicians playing on the street, and now I don't go down on the boardwalk that often anymore. It's just too overwhelming for me. It's like it's just too crazy. I've spent so much time hanging out on the boardwalk, riding my bike, and just you know, cruising around. It's not that appealing to me at this moment. I love living where I live, which is half a block from the beach on a really nice walk street, and I'm really really happy there. It's always been a tourist destination, not like it has been in the last maybe 20 years or so, but it was always a destination for people that were interested in the counterculture, because the Venice West was a historical coffee house during the 50s and early 60s. That's on Dudley. I think there's an Italian restaurant there now. And so Venice was always the mecca for the beat generation in Southern California, whereas North Beach was the happening place in San Francisco. The scene in Venice wasn't anything like the scene in North Beach, but it still had a certain appeal for, the artists and the bohemian lifestyle. I say in the last 20, 30 years it's become this, it's actually the second most popular tourist attraction, second only to Disneyland. So, some days I'll be on the boardwalk and I don't ever hear anyone speaking English. It's like people from all over the world just come to Venice because it's got some fascination about it. And I can see why. I've loved Venice, and I love being where I am. But I may move to Bakersfield. You never know, because they're pricing me out. The rents are getting higher and higher and higher. Ever since I remember Venice, there's always been conga drummers and occasional flute players like myself, and but it was nothing like the drum circles now, where there's hundreds of people. That was very, like I said, when I moved to Venice in '65, I could count the number of hippie types, the people that were, in that flow already, taking LSD, smoking a lot of weed, and listening to the new records that came out. That was like a religious experience, the new Dylan record, Blonde on Blonde, the new Beatles record, the Stones. It was music was very meaningful then. It was an experience that was a kind of a tribal sharing of a specific thought that was happening in that moment. Yeah, so Venice is like a tribal happening every day. It's just whether you're on the boardwalk or not, just being in that milieu of creativity and insanity and possibility and hope for the moment and the future, and I love it. If I never had any more than what I have now, my little one room in Venice, I'm okay. I'm not looking to have the mansion on the hill and the Lamborghini, although it wouldn't be bad, but I'm happy with simple things. Simple life. Well, everyone I meet in Venice is an unusual character, and including myself. I was kind of a jazz, guy back in high school, which was pretty rare in those days in the early 60s, because there weren't very many guys that really liked jazz, and I was really into it. So when I wasn't playing music then, but when I got to California when I was about 17 or 18, I immediately bought a flute and started teaching myself to play the flute, and with the idea of, I didn't know if I could become a real jazz musician, because it required incredible discipline and intense mental ability, which I wasn't really much on the mathematical side of music. And so I was a flute player, and I would play along, with conga drum players on the beach, and I was like the classic hippie flute player. And at the same time, I was really interested in learning how to write songs. So I got myself a guitar, and this was the era of the folk thing and Dylan, and writing songs just seemed to be like a cool way to express yourself, words and music. And so at the time I was playing flute and trying to play my own version of kind of bluesy jazz stuff, and also learning how to write songs and create melodies and write words, and that was the beginning of the process that I'm still in, as a musician and a songwriter. Well, of course, Bob Dylan changed everything for so many people because he made it possible for people with less than perfect voices to express themselves. Up until Dylan, you actually had to have like a beautiful type voice. It's Frank Sinatra or even the teen idols of the '50s. The Bobby Rydells and Bobby Darrens all had a certain style. And Dylan opened up the door for people to just be expressive. So I would say Dylan was a huge influence, and I never got to meet him, but all those people from the '60s, of course the Beatles, and I was lucky enough to work with John Phillips from the Mamas and Papas for a few years, and I thought he was an amazing songwriter and vocal arranger. I played flute in his when he went out to promote his solo album Wolf King of L.A., and I was in his touring band, so I got to hang out with him and experience his take on songwriting right when I was in my formative period of learning how to write songs. I must have written 100 songs before I even thought I had one song that I really liked. I'm proud that I've written a couple of songs that have touched people. I wrote a song for the Jefferson Starship back in the late '70s called Count on Me, and that was a big hit, and a lot of people resonate with that song and they really like it. And I wrote a song called Hearts for Marty Ballin, and a few years after that, and that was a hit for him, and that as well. So I'm proud of the fact that I sat in my room and written some things that were very personal to me, and they were put out into the airwaves and the ether of the universe, and people from other countries have heard my music and liked it. So that's a trip. I would, the happiest times of my life, I was happy as a child, playing in the snow in New York, and of course I didn't know any better, and I was happy, I was especially happy in the '60s and '70s because it was such a liberation and a revolution and a change in consciousness, and I lived in so many cool places when they were really happening. I lived in the Haight-Ashbury when it was in its full flower. I lived in Berkeley when it was amazing. I lived in Laguna Beach and Manhattan Beach and L.A. and Hollywood and Venice and Northern California up by the Russian River. I was happy up there, and in that summer of love, I was happy I learned how to make jewelry. I was living in a commune in Forestville, up by the Russian River, and I enjoyed working with my hands, and I would actually had a nice little business selling jewelry to the head shops in Haight-Ashbury and L.A. I'd make trips to the city, and actually had a career as a hippie craftsman. Yeah. It was I still I think if I hadn't become a songwriter, I'd have become a sculptor, a metal. I would like working with metal, and I think I would probably, at some point, if I had the space, I would learn welding and do large scale installations. And I don't have any graphic abilities like painting or anything like that, or but I am interested in metal and heat and what shapes you can create. The saddest has always probably involved women, and breaking up relationships. My mother when she passed, my dad who passed away when he was very young in his 40s. Well, my dog died. There were sad moments. I'm smiling now, but I mean, life is a mixture of happy, sad, up and down. It's nothing you can call a constant in any way, shape, or form. At least that's been my experience. But I've had some high highs, some low lows, and some tremendously boring moments as well. My earliest memory is probably, my childhood in Brooklyn. Uh, it was such a colorful neighborhood. I grew up in Brownsville, and there were so many different cultures. I grew up in a Jewish, black, Puerto Rican neighborhood, and it was just so colorful, and there was music and life on the streets. I remember trolley cars in Brooklyn outside my door. I remember, summers getting, when they would open the fire hydrants. I remember, the same building I lived in for the first 8 or 9 years of my life is actually still there in Brownsville. I went back there many years ago, and like 4 or 5 years ago, and it's still there, while the rest of the neighborhood has, been sort of leveled and changed. So my earliest memories were definitely the streets of Brooklyn, and like I said, I can't imagine a cooler childhood, to be exposed to all of that color and vibrant experience of life. Oh, I'm sure it did, because I didn't have any idea that I'd be, living this life that I'm living now. When you're a kid, you think, oh, I'm going to become an engineer or a doctor, and I didn't really have too many of those dreams. I didn't know what I was going to do. So, the fact that I've been able to survive as a musician and a songwriter for all these years is phenomenal to me. So, yeah, it's a bit different than I would have planned, but it's probably better because I get to create every day. And what's better than creating? Being an artist is a phenomenal thing to do while you're passing the time on planet Earth. Our scripts are kind of written, so when you meet somebody, you can go instantly into a comfort zone, be attracted to them, be comfortable with them, and not necessarily it's going to lead to a full-on relationship. But I do believe that all the women that I've been with, the opening moments of the script were always it's an explosive comfort, attraction, magic, and I'll always remember those moments with the women that I've spent time with. So I do believe in love at first sight. I think we're here, we're spirits, wandering around the universe, and when we meet someone that is from a former incarnation, a former life, someone that we're destined to be with, there's an instant, wow, I like you. You like me. Let's take a walk. The most important lessons, let's see, one of them, I guess, is, to be in this moment, to live in the now, to not be in your head worrying about tomorrow or regretting the past. And that, of course, that's easier said than done. I've spent a lot of years reading, spiritual material, and I've been influenced by many, many teachers, from Gurdjieff to Rajneesh to Gurdjieff to so many, I can't even remember. But the lesson was always to be in the moment, and to be present. And that was one of the great lessons. Possessions, you can't take anything with you in this life, so don't be attached to things and material. Like Bob Dylan said, there's no success like failure, and failure's no success at all. So, I've had great moments of success and many moments of failure, or so-called, and I've learned from both. The only thing I can say is enjoy this ride. It's a quick ride. You don't know when you're getting taken out of the game. Like my friend says, carpe diem, seize the moment, or seize the life. Just live it like there's no tomorrow, because you don't know if there's going to be one. So just enjoy where you are, and don't worry, be happy.